Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 89th of the COVID calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Today, I bring into the discussion four rising researchers who bring science, technology, and society analysis to bear on COVID-19. I'll be joined by Tim Schutz, Prerna Sridyan, Maca Suarez, and Pedro de la Torre III. You can catch COVID calls live every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube Live. Just go to the COVID Calls YouTube channel to watch. You can also watch COVID calls on Facebook Live and on Periscope. You can hear COVID calls anytime recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID calls via Twitter using the handle @USofDisaster or @COVIDCalls. Please do help spread the word, send suggestions for future guests and future topics, and please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. As of today, July 23rd, 2020, there are 15,317,997 confirmed cases of COVID-19 globally, according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. That's up from 15,008,046 cases reported yesterday. Of those, 4,005,414 are in the United States. That's up from 3,919,550 yesterday. There are now a total of 143,820 deaths from COVID-19 reported in the United States, up from 142,350 yesterday. We're back into a situation of over 1,000 deaths a day. As a way to bring humanity to the numbers, I've been reading a life story or a story of advocacy for COVID-19 sufferers every day, and I'd like to continue that now. The headline, "A South Bronx Barber Takes on a New Role in His Pandemic-Ravaged Community" by Kevin Armstrong. This appeared July 18th in the Washington Post. One by one, Brian McFadden opened 3 padlocks, lifted the graffiti-covered roller gate, and turned the key to reopen his shop for the first time since mid-March. He surveyed his workplace, tucked into an impoverished block of the South Bronx. In the window was a poster of a black boy and the words, "Don't shoot, I want to grow up." McFadden sprayed the glass before wiping it with a squeegee. "All set," said Antonio Cortez, an octogenarian cook who walks with a cane. "I'm not going to make you wait, Poppy," his barber replied. "Come on in, bring your third leg with you." In the 107 days since McFadden and other local businesses were forced to close, this community of Mott Haven has been ravaged by the coronavirus and roiled by unrest. There were marches against police brutality, looting on Fordham Road, a week of curfew, endless late-night fireworks, and a spike in shootings. McFadden, whose family has served the neighborhood for nearly half a century, wondered how and when it would end. As he finally reopened up in late June, he took note of the toll. Many of his clients are essential workers who had few options during the lockdown. He already knew of more than a dozen people who had succumbed to the disease caused by the virus. The cynosure of Cypress Avenue considers B's famous barbershop to be part confessional, part comedy lounge, but he's assuming an added role these days. He snaps on rubber gloves, slips on a face mask over his graying beard, and vigorously wipes down his chair after each cut. He offers single-use masks to anyone who enters without one. He suggests that a mask only be removed when he presses the razor behind a customer's ears or shaves a beard. The cost is $20, cash only. On each person's way out, McFadden preaches against the urge to relax, directing young and old alike to use the bottle of hand sanitizer by the door. Cognizant of the virus's devastating impact on the African-American community, he pushes back against those who claim they are impervious to COVID-19 and warns that a second wave may be on the horizon. At 54, he has health concerns of his own. He was diagnosed nearly a decade ago with congestive heart failure, and so he lives with a defibrillator in his chest. He battled a bad cold in January that he believes may have been an early coronavirus infection. McFadden inherited the shop from his father, famous McFadden Jr., and the elder man's 2011 funeral notice remains affixed to the wall. Famous Jr. was an inimitable figure in the South Bronx, first as muscle for the mafia before picking up a razor and cutting Grandmaster Flash's hair while listening to Marvin Gaye. He keeps his father's license and collage of photographs taped to the mirror by his old chair. Images and messages span generations back to the 1970s. A bumper sticker says, "Hey kids, no hope in dope." A leaflet on the cork bulletin board reminds minorities about slavery's history. A Ramadan calendar is by the Register, a reflection of McFadden's conversion to Islam while in prison. On a humid Tuesday in June, he greeted Muslims in Arabic, welcomed back the owner of the Chinese food store next door in Chinese, and spoke Spanish to a 10-year-old Honduran whose mother did not speak English. McFadden guided the pair to a poster on the wall that features 38 hairstyles. They pointed to what the boy wanted. His last customer was McFadden's second-born, Edward, who's 32 and oversees a youth basketball league. Father pinned back his son's twisted locks and trimmed his beard. The two caught up on neighborhood news, too. Son departed, but father stayed to close. He wiped down chairs, doors, and the gumball machine. He swept the cut hair off the floor and locked the front door before counting the day's earnings. Burglaries and auto thefts had increased of late. "Money is short," he said. "People are thirsty." As midnight neared, he ambled to the back room and turned off the lights. He faced eastward and prayed to Allah for 20 minutes before putting on his hat. Once outside, he pulled down the gate and applied all 3 padlocks. "Guys go wrong when they think they're bulletproof," he said. "I don't think anybody is safe." I'd like to turn to my discussion today, and I have 4 guests. I'm really excited for this discussion, and I'm going to introduce each of my guests now. Pedro de la Torre III is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York. He's also an adjunct instructor in the Humanities Department at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT. His research focuses on competing relations to place and history, as well as current and future land use in contaminated spaces. He explored these issues ethnographically in his dissertation, Unmaking Wastelands, Inheriting Waste, War and Futures at the Hanford site. Pedro recently completed a PhD in Science and Technology Studies at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Tim Schutz is a second-year graduate student in the Department of Anthropology, University of California, Irvine. Together with Kim Fortune, Jason Ludwig, and Scott Knowles, myself, he co-developed the project Quotidian Anthropocenes. He is also a member of the design group for the Platform for Experimental Collaborative Ethnography, also known as PEACE. In the COVID project, he focuses on a critical analysis of existing civic data tools to track the impact of the pandemic. Most recently, he began examining activist data archives responding to the Taiwanese company Formosa Plastics, currently expanding its operations in Louisiana's Cancer Alley. Prerna Sriyan is a second-year PhD student in the Department of Anthropology at UC Irvine. She studied environment and development at Ambedkar University, Delhi, and chemistry from the University of Delhi. Since 2017, she has worked as a researcher in the Asthma Files project, also hosted by PEACE, where she continues to develop her master's research on science and advocacy around Delhi's air pollution. Her research interests are transnational science networks, science pedagogy, and politics of collaboration. In the COVID project, she listens to understand how transnational STS collaborations work in practice. And our 4th guest, Maca Suarez, is co-founder of Kaleidos Center for Interdisciplinary Ethnography, an assistant professor at the University of Cuenca in southern Ecuador. She is currently working on the design of a cross-disciplinary digital platform that combines ethnographic material with data analysis called Ethnodata. The plan is to continue to expand this platform and include COVID-19 related issues this year. Okay, you can see the wide range of expertise of my guests. I'd like to welcome you, Prerna, Pedro, Tim, and Maca. Welcome to COVID Calls.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
So I'd like to start the way I've been starting all of these calls, and this I think will be fascinating since we have all four of you on. I'd just like to find out where you're calling from and what the COVID-19 situation is there. Maka, can I begin with you, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having us this afternoon. Thanks to everyone who's joining us as well. I'm currently in southern Ecuador in the city of Cuenca. It's the third largest city in the country. And the situation here is not so great. We had a terrible beginning in Ecuador of COVID, got way out of control in the city of Guayaquil, and it was cost a lot of lives. So we had a very strict lockdown, but economically, it's very hard for the country to stay on a strict lockdown because we don't have the resources to maintain everyone in confined spaces for so long. Over 60% of our economy is informal, so a lot of people just live day to day. This has made it that we've come out of our lockdown recently, and infection rates are now growing, and we are almost at full capacity in ICU beds. So we are not in a terrible situation, but we're not in a too great situation either. So just kind of working it week by week.
Could you tell me again that unemployment rate you said?
No, it's not the unemployment rate, it's the informal economy. So over 60% of the economy is informal. So no unemployment benefits, basically day-to-day living, a bit rough.
Is this causing some sort of rising political tension there that you can distinguish from normal tensions? I think we're all sort of trying to stay attentive to that in the United States. It's not always so easy.
Yes, that has also been something happening here. We've seen the government tighten control and also use COVID-19 as a bit of an excuse to pass austerity measures and just pass legislation that would have been very difficult without everyone on lockdown. People have tried to protest a little bit, but because infection rates are high and our health system is weak, it's not very easy for people to also risk going out. Many families live in multi-generational households as well, so younger people are more afraid of going out. So we've seen the government definitely taking advantage of this moment to pass on tough legislation.
Maka, thank you for that perspective. Prerna, same question to you.
Right now I'm located at UCI Graduate Housing. I just got tested for COVID yesterday, and my results came out to be negative, fortunately. OC also has the second highest number of cases in California now. And I read a news article today about an epidemiologist at UC Irvine who said that it spread from the affluent coastal communities of Newport Beach, Laguna, and so on. And the most number of cases in Orange County have been in the cities of Santa Ana and Anaheim, which are mainly residents of low-income people of color who are also essential workers. At UCI, there are around 100 cases of both students and employees being tested positive for a COVID. So that's what's like happening here on my end.
I'm glad that you tested negative.
Thank you.
And if you don't mind, since you shared that, if you just follow up, is that very hard to get a test in Orange County right now?
I called up UCI Student Health Center, and because I have a student graduate health insurance, I could schedule a free testing with the university. But I don't know of people who don't have health insurance, how hard it would be to get that testing done. I got it scheduled within a day, and I got the results the next day.
Pedro, let me ask you where you're calling from and what the situation's looking like there.
So I'm in Queens, New York City, and I feel like New York City gets reported on a lot. Obviously, it's a pretty terrible situation during the spring. Things are looking very different now. There's a lot of people out on the streets. There's like dining, outdoor dining. But the economic effects are starting to add up. People who have, lost their jobs, coming later and later in rent, things like that, I think that's something we're going to continue to struggle with for quite a while. And I think it's been hitting higher education particularly hard in New York City and in a lot of other places. My own university, there was a planned sort of cutoffs, layoffs basically for adjuncts. That would have been about 40% of John Jay adjunct teaching staff. But it got curtailed a little bit, but still losing about more than 2,000 or 3,000 adjunct professors from the CUNY system, and other changes that go along with that. Maybe increased class sizes. A lot of stuff is still being worked out. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting situation we're in right now. A lot better.
Is the plan certainly better than I've been teaching a class on COVID-19 and we've been taking it month by month. And we just a couple of days ago talked about April. I mentioned this yesterday on the program. And it's really to go back and look at those headlines and those briefings from April. It's just devastating. And certainly hoping New York won't go back to that. I would be amiss if I let it pass. I also taught at John Jay College at one point and absolutely loved it. Such a unique educational institution. And so do you expect to be back in the classroom in September or not?
I think there's still a little bit of uncertainty, but probably going to be teaching online there, and then some strange mix at NJIT.
Tim, let me bring you into the conversation now. Thank you, Pedro. Tim, where are you calling from and what's the situation looking like there?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. My situation is similar to Prana's. We are basically neighbors. We're both in the same, not exactly the same graduate community, but very close. So yeah, the situation like Prana described, with cases, more cases being reported. I just looked it up again. Yes, last Sunday, the positivity rate of tests that came back was over 13%, and the state threshold is 8%. So I don't know exactly when, but once that threshold was crossed, OC got put on a watch list. So yeah, and so it is really one of the dire situation. Yeah, and I've been here on campus ever since the lockdown, and I think same for Prana. We had kind of a lot of events happening. Right before the lockdown, we were almost about to go on strike. The wave of student strikes starting at UC Santa Cruz also reached Irvine, and we had a little bit of delay with everything, but it looked like the school might be affected by the strike at some point, but then COVID happened, and so school closed down. And yeah, and I mean, one thing that also affected both of us was the recent travel ban. So I've been here. I've been teaching a summer class, which just finished now, and I've been thinking about going back to Germany, where I'm from. And so I was quite anxious to be hearing the news about potential travel ban on F1 visas, in addition to the COVID-related ban for between the US and Europe. So I'm relieved that that the order has been rescinded and that there is some, we're back to the old regulations, but waiting for what's coming next, basically. Yeah.
I'm sorry for those many uncertainties. It's uncertain enough, the situation we've been in and this administration's unfailing capacity to make it somehow even harder for non-citizen residents living in the United States or US citizens who have family around the world that they're trying to stay connected with. It seems somehow that policies have been calculated to make it emotionally as difficult as possible. So thank you for sharing that perspective and that information. I want to make sure too, you've all been sort of the, Tim and Perna, you've been Southern Californiaized, I guess. You talk about OC, it's Orange County, for I believe, for those who it's funny to listen to you both refer to it like that. It's great. So I'm glad that you have that support community of graduate students there as well. So let's shift over now and talk about what's been bringing you all together from a research perspective, now that we have kind of the lay of the land of where you all are. And I'd like to find out about this transnational STS COVID-19 project that you've all been engaged with. And I guess as we begin to talk about it, we need to first define a key term here, which is STS. And for people who are not engaged in this research community, they may not know what that stands for, or what that means. Tim, can I put you on the spot first, just to tell us a little, as we talk about this project, what is STS?
Yeah, sure. So STS is short for Science and Technology Studies. And put very broadly, and it's more like a collection of approaches to think about science, technology, technical infrastructures in relation to society, to sociocultural phenomena. So the interplay of science, technology, and society, I think, is kind of a definition we can all agree on. And then it gets interesting because it's a field or kind of an interdisciplinary formation that brings in a lot of different fields: history, anthropology, philosophy, sociology. And then the interest is really in the kind of tools and methods and innovation in methods. How do we understand the worlds, the worlds we inhabit, and how are they shaped by science and technology? What I can say is, I think now, based on our introductions, we all have some training in anthropology. And just for myself, I recently got a master's degree in science and technology.
Tim has paused just for a second there. I'm sure that he will unfreeze. Sometimes complicated with several people on one call, but Maka, maybe you can pick up the baton and just want to find out a little bit more about the project at a kind of a general level. How did you first find out about it and get engaged with it? Kind of what are some of the broader goals?
Absolutely. So the idea of joining forces in this project is also to think about COVID as a kind of disaster, but a kind of transnational disaster. So our intention is to use the interdisciplinary field of STS, of Science Technology Studies, to track and analyze COVID-19 and how it's impacting different settings around the world. So here you have a small collection of researchers, but in the bigger team, we have more than 30 countries that are participating, and many people involved from the US and also from other countries.
Pedro, let me ask you a little bit more about it as well. Some of the background, as I know this is connected with a disaster STS project of long standing. Could you talk a little bit about that and where this transnational COVID project comes from? Pedro?
Sorry about that. You're cutting off a little bit for me, Scott.
Sorry about that.
So yeah, the Disaster STS project has been going on for quite a while. Scott's been involved and is basically a way to get together a lot of different science and technology focused scholars to think about how to work on and around disaster. Everything from how do we actually study and do work in the midst of disaster as something is blowing up or flooding or whatever it might be, but also to think together about what kind of sense we can make across all of these different cases. What are the kinds of methodologies, theories, ethical questions, etc., that we should be working with and thinking with. And it's always had a really important transnational character because obviously disaster unfortunately strikes everywhere. And there's amazing work on disaster that's happening in countries around the world. So getting those folks together was a key concern, a key goal of Kim Fortune and other folks who sort of put together the project. And to support it, there's a kind of instance of the platform of experimental ethnography. Peace. I think I got the acronym wrong there, but basically this platform that allows folks to kind of share, comment, and do collaborative ethnographic work digitally. So a kind of experimental platform to do that. And so obviously when the pandemic started to really affect a lot of different places, some folks involved in that came together and started having weekly calls, started creating some kinds of infrastructure to work within the platform to help make sense of what was going on, to help have conversations that can help support a lot of the different works that folks were doing, help connect people in order to create new projects like the pedagogical projects we'll be talking about soon as an example, and just to create and foster a community around this issue of the pandemic.
Tim and Prerna, welcome back. We were talking just about how the transnational STS project, the COVID project, got going. And Pedro was giving us this background, which I think is really important to see, and mentioning Kim Fortune's work here with this. Really the importance of having a transnational network of scholars that think about disasters with different tools and at different scales, and really to have the network built to a certain extent so that when this disaster began to unfold, there was already something there to work with, which I'm seeing really the value of that, and have known Kim for a while and have understood the importance of that, but I don't think I ever fully grasped the importance of having the network in place and the tools already in place and tested before COVID-19. I'd like to focus on one aspect of this that I know has been a really important part of the inquiry, and Prerna and Maka, let me put this question to you. Maka, let me ask you first about the transnational element of the platform. And I guess I'd like to start by thinking about, what does it mean to look at the pandemic transnationally? And what does it add to our analysis of COVID-19 by thinking of it across borders rather than just nationally? And I think it's an important question because so much of the data is reported nationally. And so it's very easy to think of COVID-19 as a set of nations, a set of pandemics within nations, but you've taken this transnational approach. Can you talk a little bit about what that approach is and why it's important?
Absolutely. So to sum up the three main aspects of the project, and then I'll explain how those apply, for instance, in the case of Ecuador, is there's a transnational dimension, as you've mentioned, there's an infrastructural dimension and a pedagogical component, and all those three come together as we think about this project. And we're also trying to see how those three elements are playing out in each of our localities. This is really has been key in the context of Ecuador for thinking about the pandemic, because our situation is rather different in terms of instance, the kinds of data that we are able to access, or the level of corruption that we are seeing in government related to how COVID is being managed locally, but also how other forms of structural inequality are coming out, like indigenous communities that are being systematically excluded from access to health that is key at this moment. So those are some of the things that the group of researchers that I work with at Kaleidos is looking to further research and share with this network of academics that the project is tying to. So we're using literature from disasters that the field of STS has been documenting for decades now to think about our present moment, but also how we're preparing for the future and how we might use different aspects of disaster resolution, facing disaster, and thinking about what is important to keep in mind at this time so that we can scaffold on each other's knowledge and practice as we look into the future. So those would be some of the most important elements for us in terms of transnational. In terms of the infrastructural dimension, this is a way of collaborating with researchers around the world, and this is how PEACE, the Platform for Experimental and Collaborative Ethnography, that's when it becomes key for our collaboration, because it's an ongoing form of, it's a conversation that can be ongoing. So we meet once a week virtually, but we can also continue this thinking and process through the digital tools that PEACE provides. And it's more complex than just a digital platform because it really tries to produce critical knowledge in this engagement with each other so that we can build on each other's knowledge and learn from what's happening in different places and see how that can give us new tools as well. And then pedagogically, I think that that's also something that becomes important in, especially as we face a new school year coming up, and how can we think about COVID in relationship to our students? Most of us are working in university settings, but we are also concerned about the K-12 students, and we want to think about how we can build forms of knowing COVID that include the pedagogical element and how our own teaching is influenced by what our students, families, communities are also going through.
Well, thank you for that background. I particularly want to stick for a second, Prerna, if I can, ask you about the transnational aspect, because it's much more than just sort of saying, well, what are the infection rates in this country compared to this country, or the economic impact in this country versus this country. But how do you think about comparative analysis of something as complicated as COVID-19?
I'm sorry, Scott. I think you got cut off because both mine and Tim's connections are pretty terrible at this moment. Would you mind repeating your question?
Sure. I just wanted to see if you can also speak to the transnational research aspect of it, and particularly how you compare the experience of COVID-19 across borders. It's more than just infection rates and death counts. There's a lot more nuance to it than that.
Absolutely, Scott. Thank you for that question. I think the way we are thinking about transnationalism in this project is through the three components that Maka mentioned, which is thinking of it as a transnational disaster, the pedagogical component. So one of the ways in which we are trying to do the comparison beyond it being about statistics and like what kind of statistics is visible and what is not, is we do it through the platform for experimental collaborative analysis, PEACE, which we respond in each of our calls. There is a set of questions that people who are attending the call can respond to. Either they can respond to a particular theme or they can respond coming from a particular place. So we really get a textured, fine analysis of what's happening in a moment. And the other aspect that I'm particularly interested in is figuring out what kind of concepts are relevant in the transnational aspect of this. Like if we are talking about India, what do we talk about? Do we talk about those things that are we going to talk about the migrant crisis? Are we going to talk about food security? If you're talking about Ecuador, are we going to talk about corruption? Are we going to talk about data distrust? So how do we hold these concepts from if we can think beyond concepts as being containers of place, how do we go beyond that? So these are just of my few preliminary thoughts on how I'm thinking about the transnational aspect of this. The other aspect I really want to highlight is that this is a slow collaboration in the best way possible. Like the first call happened on March 27, and all the researchers involved paid really careful attention to how do we invite people to collaborate with us. So, for example, what do we share with the public? What do we share with the researchers? What do we share within ourselves? Making sure that people are on the same page, making sure that we are creating a kind of community to do that. And the most recent call we had was today. So it's been around four months of figuring out the tactics of collaboration. And I've really learned so much from all of the collaborators present here and elsewhere.
That really speaks to the way that we're learning how to do social science and humanities research in this time. I mean, it's interesting you describe it as a sort of slow project, but of course it has to be. Maybe that affords also some advantages from a research perspective. I wonder if, just staying with this transnational aspect for a moment, Maka, back to you, what kinds of surprises, sort of analytic surprises or maybe empirical surprises, have come about since the group started to come together? How have you changed your thinking? Maybe even in this transnational aspect, what categories have not held up as well? Or what sort of empirical findings have changed the thinking of the group a little bit?
Mm-hmm. I think that, speaking at least from the case of Ecuador, some of the things that have happened in our local communities have resonated with research that other people had done in the past or that they knew about. So I'm not a disaster expert, but many of the people in our research team are, and it's been illuminating to see how other communities had responded, for instance, to issues of communication. How do you communicate when a disaster takes place? What do you communicate? Which are the voices of authority in that context, and who gets listened to and who doesn't? We worked very closely with the Shuar community who was affected by COVID. And from the start, the Ministry of Health did not believe that the community was infected with COVID. And they had a very racist approach to the treatment of COVID in that specific area of the Ecuadorian Amazon rainforest, and insisted that people did not have COVID, but the community thought they were infected and wanted to be tested. And the Ministry of Health offered psychologists and said that what was happening was due to the way they lived, because they lived in huts filled with smoke and things like this. So it became very evident that there was not only a problem of systemic racism within the Ministry of Health in Ecuador, but also a problem of communication, because the community had been raising their voices and they weren't the only ones. There were many communities in the Amazon Ecuadorian rainforest that had been calling attention to this, and they weren't being listened to. So these were voices that were not accounted for, or were not having an outlet to express what was happening in their own communities, but also in their own language, which is different to Spanish, which is one of the national languages. They speak Shuar, and information was not communicated in Shuar, but rather only in Spanish. So many of these small things became part of how we realized that we needed to think way beyond, we already knew beyond the numbers, but also beyond what we knew about disaster, and that this broader community could truly bring together a set of knowledge that looked into various aspects that we didn't have an expertise on. So that was an incredible addition to how we were thinking about COVID. And it was also something that we could contribute to by bringing these different voices from, for instance, the Amazon rainforest, which were in the broader project before that. So there's a sort of double way of communication that really works to learn about COVID and learn how to face it.
That's an extraordinary example. I want to remind people that you're listening to COVID Calls, and we are talking today about the transnational STS COVID-19 project. And I want to turn to what you've each mentioned it, and let's dive into it a little bit more and talk about teaching at this time. Talk about how your own teaching may be changing, how you're thinking about supporting students. Pedro, could you take us a little bit into what you're learning as part of this collaborative and how it's changing you as a teacher, how it's changing some of your approaches, how you support students as they begin to learn how to do ethnography? And one thing that's to me very provocative about this time is the degree to which we have an opportunity for people who've never heard terms like ethnography to actually be really important contributors in ethnographic projects because of this time that we're living in. What is your thinking on that, and can you report a little bit about how the group has thought about pedagogy in this time?
Yeah, it's really interesting time. I mean, teachers have to completely redo their classes in the middle of, within a week in many cases. There's still a lot of uncertainty about the fall for many. And I think even more broadly than that, we're separated from our students in kind of new ways, even as students probably need us more than they have ever before. And yeah, students are also in this position where there's these incredible changes happening around them that they couldn't really have foreseen or imagined. It almost, in some cases, feels almost strange to go on with regular schoolwork without, addressing these things that are going on in their lives. So we've addressed this, we addressed this in a few ways. We've had some really excellent discussions as part of our weekly calls, and it's something that always kind of, often comes up for discussion around other issues. And we've also started to put together what we're calling the COVID-19 ethnographic student portfolio. But basically, it's putting together sort of formatted assignments that different professors could use in their classes. All of them ethnographic, kind of in one way or another. But also responsive to the need for distance learning, responsive to the particular questions that are on people's minds now. And we really wanted to, first of all, approach it as an experiment, like in the spirit of PEACE, in the spirit of not PECE, the platform I was talking about before for experimental ethnographic collaborative research. So we wanted to create a kind of socio-technical infrastructure to support and bring together educators, around the world, bring together students around the world, and let them contribute in some way to knowledge and discussion around COVID-19. So if you go to the STS site now, you can find the ethnographic portfolio. It's still under construction, but we hope to have a lot more up soon. We have some, I think, really interesting kind of assignments that can be used and adapted in different classes in different contexts. One I did in the spring, rapid student interview project. So just a sort of set of questions about kind of everyday life during a pandemic. And students would interview people that they are stuck at home with, or using the phone, web chat, etc. Other folks who they know, kind of about even the everyday life of lockdown and moving in a pandemic, etc. And we're taking those anonymous interviews and posting excerpts from them, kind of thematically, in a kind of collage kind of format. And so that was a really interesting project. There's another class in Germany that was doing it over the summer, and so we're sort of amassing all that information and presenting it in a public way, and students get credit for it, and so they contribute to research in that way. Some other great assignments are building on the great work of Ali Kenner, and who's at Drexel, a energy vulnerability survey. This is something that she does, but a sort of miniaturized version that is going to be available for students to look at how people are becoming vulnerable when it comes to their utilities and a lot of other things around that. A community case studies based on environmental justice, assignments. So really looking at what are the social determinants of health in your community, what are the sources of resilience, et cetera. And another good one is a rapid qualitative research design. So a lot of interesting ideas that you could implement and change, and a lot of support that we're going to try to bring to educators who are involved with this.
That's great. So, I mean, what you described is the Makov's talking about the empirical findings as part of the transnational aspect of the work, and now you also have these many different assignments flowing in from people who are part of the network around the world. I guess I just want to pause there for a second, because there's a sort of very active approach to pedagogy here, which some teachers might find a little unsettling, which is to say you're literally teaching the disaster as it's unfolding. And I have to confess, I'm a historian, and I'm doing this too. I mean, I'm teaching a course on COVID-19 right now as if it's history. And it's challenging pedagogically because, of course, a lot of what I'm doing is reaching back to the Spanish flu, or reaching back to the 1968 pandemic or AIDS crisis or whatever it may be, and bringing that to bear on what's happening now. So your description is making me feel better, that I wasn't too far off on a limb and wanting to take those kind of risks. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the way you're describing pedagogy is it's also perhaps opening up avenues for advocacy, for teaching across disciplines, for carrying forward even perhaps certain traditions of activism or science communication. I mean, it's more than, it's not inert. It's not sort of seeing education as a transfer of a body of knowledge to a group of initiates. There's something a little bit more active about this approach you're describing. I see that Prerna is back, and she has Tim there now. This has been a remarkable behind the scenes COVID call. And Prerna, Pedro was just talking to us about the teaching, and we're talking about some of these inheritances of advocacy, interdisciplinary education, activism that comes through the pedagogical part. Could you speak to that a little bit in your collaboration with the group, how you're seeing pedagogy? You could be muted. It seems like we're having a little trouble right now with that. While they're sorting that, Pedro, I'm going to bring that question back to you just to continue what we were talking about. What are some of the older approaches to teaching or activism that are coming through as you're having these pedagogy discussions?
So Scott, you're cutting in and out a little bit for me too. So you're asking like what some of the pedagogical ideas behind what we're doing, or that? Yeah, I mean, for me, a really, really big thing is that, especially since this is something that's unfolding, since I have certainly a lot more questions and confusions than answers. Really trying to make the classroom a space where students can feel some sense of efficacy, where they can feel like they're contributing in some way. And to make it something relevant, to make this something where students can use some of the ideas in the classroom to interrogate their current situation and maybe figure out how to change it. And so I think there's definitely a different model going on than the sort of download lecture kind of pedagogy that exists elsewhere. I think many of the folks involved in the project are inspired by free area and other modes of pedagogy that are aimed at something very different that are aiming at engaging students as sources of knowledge and sort of collaborative discussion, et cetera, as a real source of strength in education. It's much more important than lecturing in many cases.
Let me stick with this and bring Maka in as well. And I've spoken with other anthropologists in COVID calls about the challenges, the ethical challenges. I mean, there's always, there's the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, and those kinds of formal things, but there are intense ethical challenges involved with disaster research, broadly defined, and they seem to be multiplied. The impossibilities of distance interviewing and getting consent, which are hard enough. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on that as it's come up in your discussions.
Yeah. In terms of our project, because it's student research and because it's aims less at kind of generalizable knowledge is what the IRB looks for in the US context anyway. That sort of formal ethical review has been less of an issue, although obviously it's really important to check with the IRB board, et cetera, if you're bringing this to your campus. But there's a lot of ethical issues that aren't addressed by that process, right? So that's something that we're taking very seriously. We have for the Rapid Student Interview Project a kind of notice for all the interviewees that are going out. It's important to work with your students to figure out who should not be interviewed in a different context. Had an interview assignment for a class, and a police officer who was a student wanted to interview someone he had arrested before. Obviously, completely unethical, right? So have a real discussion about who you should or should not interview. And one thing that came up today too was dealing with grief and loss and the kind of trauma that a lot of people are facing. In my classroom, it didn't come up very much just because it was a little bit earlier on. But especially at this point, I think there will be a major issue, and to make sure that you just have really good discussions with students about the need to respect that, the need to not re-traumatize people. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it's a difficult issue.
Let's get to a question here that's coming in from Jorge Benavides. Maka, let me turn this one to you, if you don't mind. I'm not sure if you've been teaching in this time, but certainly you're anticipating this going forward. How do you deal with students' anxiety about studying the pandemic while living it? This is a question, I haven't thought about it quite this way. It would be equivalent to, I suppose, the courses that were taught about Hurricane Katrina, for example, in the immediate aftermath, in which there still was debris and there was still trauma all around. It presents a very serious set of questions that compound the normal pedagogical questions with ethical questions. How do you think about this kind of a question, Maka?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Jorge. That is very important for us to think with. And in the context of Ecuador, I have been teaching medical anthropology, and I teach medical students. So these will be the doctors of the future. And it's been a very interesting, gratifying, humbling experience to do this over a pandemic. And I think this is also a place where this international community of the scholars coming together can really support our efforts, because there's often in disasters a context that there's a likelihood of a paradigm lock-in. So to see things sometimes only in one way, to characterize them in a limited manner, and having people thinking from the very different perspectives they're coming from, and having a comparative perspective can really help support each other as well, both as teachers, but also our students. So one of the things we've actually been looking at, and this is something that you can probably relate to a lot is the history of pandemics and how we can learn from history. It's not so common in Ecuador. We have very strict disciplinary boundaries. So my students are not often in contact with anthropology or history or sociology. So it's a very technical way of learning medicine. And so this course has been helpful in thinking about how also pedagogy sort of unfolds when these things happen. And we've been able to learn together also. So look at the history of pandemics to see how that's pertinent to the context of Ecuador, but also how it's connected to other aspects of climate change, but also of racism, structural inequalities, gender differences and gender violence. So many of these aspects have come in together while teaching about a pandemic. And I think that having a place where students can talk about it in an open way and also talk about the fear they face, the traumas Pedro was mentioning, and what it means to be going through this is also very important for our students.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I want to remind people you're listening to COVID Calls, and you can get your calls in, get your questions in, and put them into the YouTube live chat. Prerna and Tim have had some technical issues staying connected, and they have created a workaround. Looks like they have built something to, I'm not quite sure I can use it yet, so hopefully we can bring them back into the conversation here in a moment. I like that they haven't given up. It speaks to their tenacity as researchers and builders of civic data infrastructure, which I like to think of COVID Calls as in its best days. But until I get a chance to bring them back in, I want to get another question in, and this is both for Pedro and for you, Maka. Let me ask you this question first, Maka. I'm thinking about, so you all started doing this work in the earlier days of the pandemic, and at the same time, there have been so many, of course, the murder of George Floyd happened, and the Black Lives Matter movement unfolding and the protests, combined with also the sort of pro-social elements that, to me, in the United States at least, were frankly surprising and gratifying, that so many people were willing to go. We've had constant fights about it, but still millions of people were willing to go and lock down and disrupt their lives, basically to help save the lives of people they would never meet. So there are a lot of different dimensions to this unfolding in time. And I want to sort of ask you about that. For example, let's talk about George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. Is the project you're working on flexible enough to take in new disasters sort of on board? It's compounding as we go. Either one of you want to
I thought
take
Pedro,
that?
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, we're still trying to get Tim and Perna on by calling them. A little distracted. But yeah, I mean, this has been incredible to see. So many people coming out during a pandemic, so many people dealing with navigating a pandemic in order to deal with this longstanding issue. And one thing we definitely saw, certainly in New York and elsewhere, was just how much the rules around social distancing were being enforced in a way that was completely discriminatory. For personal experience, I would go out to parks in Astoria, and there would be a bunch of people without masks sitting together in crowded conditions, and the police would be doing nothing, maybe even handing out masks in certain cases. In other parts of the city, they would be the targets of arrest, fines, if not worse. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's been the confluence of these two events is kind of amazing, shocking, a little bit scary as well in terms of the government response, and as we've seen lately, the federal response to these protests. But I think that we're in this really strange moment where so much is being questioned, right? From the early days of the pandemic, I think so much of our kind of economic orthodoxy was being challenged because so much needed to be questioned about how the state responded to it, about the ways in which so many people, particularly people of color and working class people, were being not helped, put in harm's way in a million different ways. And it's, I think it's, a lot of questions about inequality and oppression in the United States and around the world have really risen to the surface in incredible ways.
Maybe just to tie that into the project as well, it is a project that is precisely designed to take into account what may happen that we don't know about yet. So it brings in theoretical frameworks from disaster situations in sort of our role as academics, but it also is thought around case studies so that we can build the knowledge in the project around what is happening locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. And these are case studies that can speak to each other as well. And those are our hope, and we've been doing some of that already, is that different members of the communities or other community practitioners can also be a part of that discussion, because this is, of course, not only an academic problem, it is something that as a society we're trying to figure out as well. So the project isn't set in just one way. It definitely has a great level of flexibility that can include in many of these different other phenomena going on.
We're going to try something here a little unconventional because we lost the link with Tim and Prerna, but I have Tim on the phone, and so I'm going to ask him a question, and hopefully he can contribute to the conversation in this way. We've had, actually, despite the technical issues, very lively conversation. Tim, I just want to ask you about this infrastructure aspect that also came up earlier in the call. I'd like to hear from you a little bit about the civic data tools that you're interested in terms of tracking the COVID-19 pandemic, and how do you bring a critical eye? This came up yesterday in our discussion about the census. How do you bring a critical eye to all of these data sets and visualizations where Denise Ross yesterday said that we're starving at a buffet of data? And I thought that was an interesting way to think about it. How are you approaching this? How do we choose the good from the bad data and visualization?
Well, thank you, Scott. That's a great question. And yeah, so Prerna is also with me. If people have questions, she can respond to, since we're both working on the civic data project together. But my approach before the COVID project was looking at civic data in the context of environmental justice, environmental pollution, and I use the term civic to distinguish it a little bit from other projects like citizen science projects, where the people enrolled, in developing tools, using tools, don't necessarily have a say in the goals of a project, how the tools are designed, and so that's why I use the term civic to kind of highlight that they are both non-commercial and their sort of capacity to reflect on the tools change their design. But I think you're right. I like the metaphor of the data buffet, because what I learned working with the students in the class that I teach for now, so there's so much data out there that you really have to find projects that already either have this critical edge to it. So, for example, the frag tracking projects or work done by scholars at the iSchool in Toronto in the environmental sort of sector. And I haven't really seen that in sort of in the COVID domain yet, but we're all looking for it. What I've seen is great environmental journalism, so work done by ProPublica, for example. So those are things I keep very close tabs on. But I'm taking learning from the environmental justice work that a lot of those data sources will become outdated very quickly. I think that's something you said yesterday too in the discussion with Jared Thorpe and Yanni Dukisas, that what's the longevity of some of the projects? And in the environmental justice sector, you can see a lot of projects get abandoned. For example, for high risk facilities in your neighborhood, you often don't even know how to access that data. So my question really is, what's the equivalent for COVID? And that's why I'm so excited about this project.
That's such a crucial question, and I think a quite brilliant insight to learn from environmental justice, the problems of civic data access in environmental justice. And as we've learned, Tim, in your and my work with other colleagues in Louisiana, is that some of these environmental justice communities, I mean, they may have what outwardly looks like a very robust, they have a great website, let's say, good contacts, even good reports, but then you speak with them and you realize so much is hinging on one person and one person being healthy. And so there is this sort of, the human being behind the data, and particularly in a time of health uncertainty, I'm very concerned about that. I'm going to have to assure you all that Tim is concerned about that as well, because we've now even lost him on the phone. But we're going to be diligent here and stick with this. Let's see if we can get him back. And as we're doing that, my apologies to listeners.
It's an experience of what COVID looks like in reality. So many things actually don't work, and we need to improvise with few tools and what we have. But getting creative is precisely our mission here.
It's actually, this is really starting to feel often like how we operate in the field. We're, trying to triangulate, bring people online, get them into conversations. Okay, we're not able to complete that call at this time, so we'll leave that there. But I'm glad we did get to hear some of what Tim's been working on, and I know that he's also, and I don't know, Pedro or Maka, if you could speak to this, just because you've been in contact working with Tim so much, how this project you're working on now connects with the Quotidian Anthropocenes project or the Visualizing Toxic Places project. Ali Kenner was mentioned earlier, genius colleague of mine at Drexel, the Vulnerability Research Project, Angela Kune's research on open data in Kenya. So many sort of touch points between this transnational COVID project and these others. Either of you able to speak to either one of those and say a little bit about where they connect or how those connections have been interesting?
And sorry again, Scott, having a little trouble hearing you. But you're talking about the connection between the Quotidian Anthropocenes project and this project. I wasn't actually involved in the Quotidian Anthropocenes project, so probably not the best person to respond. But one thing that strikes me is that we're both talking about these huge global phenomenon, but also ways in which they can be engaged ethnographically and engaged in terms of everyday life and many other different scales, right? And we're having to do that a little bit with this project, and also dealing with the scale of the transnational, which is similar in some ways. It's both global, but also intensely, can be intensely personal, and be very much a part of quotidian life. So do you have any thoughts about that, Maka? I don't know if you're more involved in.
No, not directly involved in those projects, but we definitely know that work like the one Ali Kenner has been doing builds on an also long history of looking at climate change, looking at air pollution, looking at asthma rates, and now also looking at energy poverty in the area of Philadelphia, and how those are directly connected to COVID as well. So what I know in their project they've been looking at is they've been creating a survey, an extensive survey that is researching how people who are affected by COVID or not are also affected by other forms of poverty, like energy poverty or access to energy. And so what I think is very important to highlight in this context is how these different knowledges from the scholars that are involved are bringing in new approaches to COVID-19. Like, we weren't thinking of it in terms of energy poverty, but with Ali's project and her research team, that has become something that we're also attuned to now to see and look into. So how this sort of scaffolds on each other's previous knowledge as well.
I want to thank you both for that, and I want to give Tim a chance to speak to that as well. I've got him back on the line here. Tim, we were just talking a little bit about the touch points between the transnational COVID project and other projects that the Disaster STS platform has been involved with. Ali Kenner's work. I know you had mentioned earlier the Quotidian Anthropocenes project, maybe the Angela Okune's research on open data in Kenya. Can you talk a little bit about any of those and how they're connecting here?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So the COVID project really exists in this universe of different projects that are hosted on different instances of the Peace platform, starting with a platform called the Asthma Files, and then the Disaster STS platform that you mentioned. And the goal with the Quotidian Anthropocene project really was looking at how environmental problems, climate change, and industrial pollution, the Anthropocene writ large, unfolds in different places, but also being attentive to different themes. So the strength of that project was that it had both a focus on place, the Anthropocene in specific sites, but then also thematic focus on energy, on civic data, and so on. And based in the pandemic, basically put a stop on the Quotidian Anthropocene project, at least the empirical parts, where we did field campuses in St. Louis, in Cancer Alley, and we had the next one planned in Texas. So the COVID project basically picks up where Quotidian Anthropocene left us, and greatly expands it by being open to these other projects. So as you said, Angela Okune has a project, a PhD project, looking at qualitative data research and open data in Kenya, and then again, we have this series of smaller projects looking at energy transition, energy vulnerability, and that is to say that the project really has both a transnational focus on place and themes, and that the project is open. So if anybody's listening already has a project going, there are many different ways that you can become, that you sort of interface with the COVID project.
Can you give us a specific, anybody who's engaged here in the call, give us a specific way that we can connect with the work of this transnational COVID-19 project? How can we connect with it if we want to?
Yeah, so I can respond to that. I think it's best to go to the Disaster STS Research Network, and on the front page you can find the project, or you can email Kim Fortune, kfortune@uci.edu, if you want to become a part of the project.
Great, and I know you have some meetings coming up actually soon, which people could still get involved with this.
Yeah, I can briefly say, so we have 2 more meetings coming up before we take a brief summer break and then return in fall. And so the next meeting is actually a great meeting for new people to join, because we will take sort of a look back at our prior meetings, see what we've learned so far and where the project is headed. Again, kind of leveraging that it's an ethnographic project and flexible. So that's next Thursday. It's a great opportunity for new people to join. and then the meeting after that, we will sort of give a collective introduction to the digital workspace. So if you've never worked with the Peace platform and are interested in learning digital collaboration, that's another great meeting.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up now. Is Prerna there, Tim?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to give her the...
I'm here.
Hi, I just want to give you the last word, Prerna, and it's the last question. It's actually a very hard question, I think, but maybe I wanted to give you a chance to respond. What do researchers need right now? What do you? I'm really concerned about the stamina of the research community, how we keep our connections together, how we keep our technologies together, how we keep ourselves, moving in this difficult time with the work. Can you share with us your thoughts about that?
Thank you so much, Gordon. It's a question that I often find myself thinking because there's so much work coming out on COVID, especially from the social sciences and humanities. So one part of our project and my thinking too has been what are the tactics that this collaboration really brings to the fore. And I've learned from our collaborators who work in different advocacy communities. I would like to mention two collaborators who I've really learned from. One is Amanda Winden. She's the chair of the Board of Trustees for the Simon community in London. It's a community for the homeless. It's during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the other person is Joshua Moses, and he's worked on the religious response to the attacks of September 11th and Hurricane Katrina, studying the formation of disaster expertise. And he also works with indigenous communities on inequality, dispossession, community well-being, migration, and identity. And these people, along with other collaborators, have really brought to the fore how important it is to take care of our communities and ourselves and engage in practices of mutual aid and reciprocity during the pandemic. In fact, one of the things that the project is about is being really responsive to the needs of students, researchers, and advocacy workers. When the Black Lives Matter movement happened, we were scheduled to do another call, but we changed the schedule and we did a call on June 11th on COVID-19, anti-Blackness, and rebellious mourning, where people really responded to a set of questions of how people who have been thinking beyond neoliberal crisis of sovereignty and so on, people who have been sort of living with these crises for a long time, what do they have to teach us about advocacy in this moment? What do they have to teach us about pedagogy in this moment? So these are kind of these are the thoughts I want to leave with in this call.
Prerna Srigyan, Tim Schutz on the phone, and Maca Suarez and Pedro de la Torre on screen. Really, thank you very much. We've got one final comment coming in here from Jorge Benavides, and thank you for your contribution to our discussion today. Jorge, and I know Kim Fortune has been listening. Apologies for some of the technical difficulties, but we still had a great conversation, I think, and learned a lot about the many different dimensions of the project that you're all engaged with, this transnational STS COVID-19 project. And I think it'll be necessary, as was described a couple of times today, that the slow research in the midst of the slow disaster, I think it'll be crucial to have you back to talk more about what you're learning, what you're finding as we move later into the fall. I wish I could say I thought this was going to be over soon, but of course, even after epidemiologists tell us it's over, it will not be, according to the many different ways you've described how you're thinking about this disaster today. I want to thank you all for your brilliance and for your commitment to this work. And I want to remind everyone that you can tune in to COVID Calls Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow, I'll be talking, closing out the week, with Marcus Hendricks. He is the director of the Stormwater Infrastructure Resilience and Justice Lab at the University of Maryland. We'll be talking about infrastructure and the pandemic. And until then, everyone stay healthy, and thank you for tuning into COVID Calls.